The courthouse steps were cold beneath my feet, but I barely felt them. All I could feel was the weight of the envelope in my jacket pocket, the one containing documents that would change everything. My family sat in the front row of the courtroom, their faces twisted with desperation, their eyes pleading for mercy they had never shown me. My father, the man who had once told me I was a disgrace to his name, now looked at me like I held his entire future in my hands. And I did. Behind me, my lawyer whispered something I couldn't hear over the pounding of my own heart. The judge was about to read the final verdict. This was the moment I had been waiting for, planning for, and dreaming about for 3 long years. Everything my family had taken from me, everything they had stolen, every lie they had told, every moment they had made me feel worthless, it was all about to come crashing down on their heads. But to understand why I was standing here today, why I felt absolutely nothing as I watched them beg for forgiveness, you have to go back to where this story really began. If you're new to Family Dark Blames, subscribe for more unforgettable family betrayal and revenge stories. Like this video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, here's what really happened. My name is Marcus Thompson. I was 32 years old at the time this all went down, living in Austin, Texas, working as a senior architect for a downtown firm. I had spent 8 years building my career, pouring everything I had into designs that would make people's lives better, creating spaces where families would grow and memories would be made. It was ironic, really, considering how broken my own family was. I lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the South Congress neighborhood, surrounded by sketches and blueprints that covered every available surface. My mother had died when I was 22, and after her passing, my relationship with my father and my older brother Derek had deteriorated into something cold and distant. My father, Robert Thompson, was a retired businessman who had built a small real estate empire from nothing. He was the kind of man who believed in tough love, though his version of tough love looked more like neglect and emotional abuse. Derek was 3 years older than me, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. He had followed our father into real estate, while I had chosen a different path, one that my father considered beneath our family status. Growing up, I had always been the quiet one, the one who preferred to be alone with his drawings rather than chasing girls or getting into trouble like Derek. My mother had understood me. She had seen something in my designs, something special, and she had encouraged me to pursue architecture even when my father laughed at the idea. She used to tell me that I had a gift, that I could see beauty in places where others saw nothing. When she died suddenly from a heart attack, something inside me broke. I felt like I had lost my only ally, the only person in the world who truly believed in me. After the funeral, my father barely spoke to me for months. He buried himself in work, and Derek followed his lead. I was left to grieve alone in a house that no longer felt like home. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make something of myself, to prove that I was worth something even if my father couldn't see it. By the time I graduated from the University of Texas with honors, my father had already written me off. He and Derek had built their real estate business into something successful, and they made sure I knew I wasn't part of it. When I got my first job at a small architecture firm, my father told me I was wasting my potential, that I should have gone into business like a real man. I learned to ignore his comments, to build a wall around my heart so that his words couldn't hurt me anymore. Over the years, I became successful in my own right. I won awards for my designs, I was featured in local publications, and I finally felt like I had earned a place in the world. My father never acknowledged any of it. He never once told me he was proud of me. It was like I didn't exist to him unless he needed something. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 years ago, when my father was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. I didn't hear about it from him. I heard about it from my Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, who called me one evening with concern in her voice. She told me that Robert had been forgetting things, getting confused, and that Derek had taken over the business completely. I felt a mixture of emotions that I couldn't quite sort out. Part of me was worried about my father, despite everything. Part of me was angry that I had been kept in the dark, and part of me was suspicious because Derek had never been the type to take care of anyone but himself. I decided to reach out, to make an effort to reconnect with my family. I called my father's house, but Derek answered. He told me that our father was resting and couldn't come to the phone. He said he would have our father call me back. That call never came. I tried again a few days later, and again, Derek gave me the same excuse. It was then that I started to get worried about more than just my father's health. I drove to my father's house in the hill country, a beautiful estate he had purchased years ago with the money my mother had inherited from her parents. It was a sprawling property with a main house and several guest cottages, surrounded by oak trees and rolling hills. It was the kind of place that should have been filled with family gatherings and laughter, but it had always felt cold and empty to me. When I arrived, Derek was surprised to see me. He tried to act welcoming, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously as he let me inside. My father was sitting in his favorite chair in the living room, staring blankly at the television. He didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. He didn't seem to recognize me at all. It took me a moment to realize that he looked worse than I had expected. He had lost weight, and his skin had a gray pallor that made him look like a ghost. "Derek, what's going on with him?" I asked, keeping my voice low so my father couldn't hear. "You said it was early-stage dementia. This looks much worse." Derek shrugged, a casual gesture that made my blood boil. "It's progressing faster than the doctors expected. It happens sometimes. I'm handling it, Marcus. You don't need to worry." "He's my father too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a right to know what's happening with him. I want to see his medical records, talk to his doctors." "He can't speak for himself anymore," Derek said, and there was something cold in his voice that made me uneasy. "I'm his power of attorney. I'm making all the medical decisions. You don't need to be involved." I left that day feeling like I had been punched in the gut. Something didn't feel right. My father's condition seemed too advanced for the timeline Derek had described. And Derek's refusal to involve me, his dismissive attitude, it all felt like he was hiding something. I started doing my own research into dementia and its progression, and what I found only deepened my suspicions. Early-stage dementia typically progresses slowly over years, not months. My father's decline seemed accelerated, unnatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was somehow responsible. I decided to dig deeper, to find out what was really going on. I hired a private investigator named Sarah Chun, a former police officer who came highly recommended. She was smart, thorough, and completely discreet. I told her everything, about my family history, about my father's diagnosis, about Derek's suspicious behavior. I asked her to look into my father's financial records, his medical records, and anything else that might shed light on what was happening. For weeks, Sarah worked quietly, gathering information and building a picture of what Derek had been up to. What she found made my blood run cold. It turned out that Derek had been systematically draining my father's assets for years. He had transferred money from my father's accounts into his own, using forged signatures and fake documentation. He had sold off several properties that belonged to my father and kept the proceeds for himself. And worst of all, he had been prescribing medication to my father that wasn't necessary, medications that could cause confusion and memory loss in someone who didn't need them. He was deliberately making my father sick to maintain control over his estate. When Sarah presented me with her findings, I felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. Derek had stolen from our father. He had manipulated his illness. He had isolated him from everyone who might have noticed what was happening, and all while pretending to be the devoted son, the one who was taking care of everything. I wanted to confront him immediately, to scream in his face and expose every single one of his crimes. But Sarah counseled me to be patient. She told me that if I acted too quickly, Derek would have time to cover his tracks and destroy evidence. She advised me to build a legal case, to gather more evidence, and to strike when the time was right. It was the smart play, but it was also the hardest thing I've ever had to do. For months, I sat on the knowledge that my brother had betrayed our family in the worst possible way. I watched him from a distance, attending family events with a smile on my face while inside I was burning with fury. During that time, I also discovered something else that made the betrayal even more personal. My father's will, the one he had written years ago when my mother was still alive, divided his estate equally between Derek and me. But Derek had created a new will, one that named him as the sole beneficiary. He had forged my father's signature on that will, just as he had forged it on countless financial documents. He had cut me out completely, and he had been so confident that I would never find out, so sure that I was too weak and too disconnected to notice. That was his fatal mistake. He underestimated me. He always had. He thought I was the quiet, sensitive brother who would just fade away and accept whatever scraps my father's estate threw my way. He had no idea that I was building a case against him, gathering evidence, and preparing to destroy everything he had built on the foundation of lies. I couldn't do it alone. I needed a lawyer who could guide me through the complex process of legal justice, someone who would take my case seriously and understand the emotional weight of what I was going through. I found that person in Amanda Rodriguez, a fierce and brilliant attorney who specialized in elder abuse and estate fraud cases. She was everything I needed: sharp, strategic, and utterly unafraid to take on powerful people. When I laid out everything Sarah had found, Amanda didn't flinch. She looked me in the eye and told me we would win this case. She also warned me that it would be messy, that my family would fight back, and that I needed to be prepared for the emotional fallout. I told her I was ready. Looking back, I don't think I truly understood what being ready meant. The investigation continued to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah uncovered more details about Derek's financial schemes, including offshore accounts and shell companies designed to hide the money he had stolen. She found witnesses who had seen Derek manipulating our father, people who had been afraid to speak up because they feared his power and influence. I learned that several of my father's old friends had tried to reach out to him, only to be turned away by Derek, who claimed our father was too ill to see anyone. He had isolated our father so completely that no one could get close enough to see what was really happening. I also discovered something that broke my heart even more than everything else. Our mother had left a separate trust fund for me, a fund that Derek had no control over. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to help me fund my investigation and legal battle without putting my own finances at risk. It felt like a gift from beyond the grave, a final act of love from the woman who had always believed in me. The months leading up to the trial were some of the most difficult of my life. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that Derek might discover what I was doing and try to cover his tracks or worse. I had to be careful about who I trusted, what I said, and where I went. I stopped answering calls from family members, afraid that my voice might betray my anger and reveal my plan. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through the world with a purpose that no one around me understood. There were moments when I almost gave up. The weight of everything I was carrying felt unbearable. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all of this was worth it. I doubted myself constantly, wondering if I was doing this for revenge or for justice, if there was even a difference anymore. But then I would remember my father. I would remember the man he had been before the dementia, before the betrayal, before our relationship had crumbled into nothing. He hadn't been perfect, not even close. He had been difficult and demanding, cold and distant. But he had also been a man who loved my mother deeply, who had worked hard to build something for his family. He had been taken advantage of by his own son, a son he had trusted and loved. Derek didn't deserve to get away with what he had done, and I didn't deserve to be cast aside like I meant nothing. I owed it to my mother, to the memory of the family we had once been, to fight back. When the trial began, I thought I was prepared. I thought I had steeled myself against whatever Derek might say or do. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my brother on the witness stand, looking at me with such contempt and hatred. He painted a picture of me as a jealous younger brother, bitter and resentful because I had never received the recognition I thought I deserved. He told the court that I had fabricated the evidence, that I was trying to destroy him because I was envious of his success. I sat in the courtroom, listening to him lie, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Some of them believed him. I could see it in their faces. But I had the evidence. I had the receipts, the signed documents, the witness testimony. I had everything we needed to prove the truth. Amanda was brilliant in the courtroom. She methodically dismantled Derek's testimony, presenting evidence that contradicted every single one of his claims. She called witnesses who had seen Derek manipulating our father, employees of the care facility who had noticed strange behaviors. She presented financial records that showed the money transfers, the forged documents, the shell companies. Derek sat there, his face growing paler with each piece of evidence that was introduced. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He knew he was losing. He knew that everything he had built was about to collapse. And the worst part, for him, was that he had no one to blame but himself. My father was too ill to testify, but Amanda arranged for a medical expert to explain the extent of his condition and the role that unnecessary medication had played in his decline. The expert testimony was damning. It painted a picture of Derek as a man who had willingly and knowingly harmed his own father for financial gain. I saw people in the courtroom shake their heads in disbelief. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about the complete and utter betrayal of a family. Derek had not just stolen from our father. He had destroyed him. The man I had once known, the complex, difficult, but ultimately human man who had raised me, was gone. He was a shell, barely aware of his surroundings, and it was Derek's fault. There were moments during the trial when I looked at my brother and felt something that surprised me. It wasn't hatred. It was pity. He had spent his entire life chasing our father's approval, desperate to prove that he was the better son. And in doing so, he had lost himself completely. He had become a monster, someone capable of hurting the people who loved him most. And for what? Money? Status? A legacy that would now be remembered as one of the greatest familial betrayals in our family's history? I wondered if it had been worth it to him. I wondered if he regretted it. But I knew, deep down, that he didn't. He regretted getting caught. He didn't regret what he had done. The verdict came down on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was packed, filled with journalists who had been following the case, with curious onlookers who had become invested in the drama, and with the few family members who hadn't turned their backs on me. My Aunt Margaret was there, her hand in mine, her eyes filled with tears. She had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal, the one family member who had believed me from the very beginning. The judge read the verdict, and I felt the room spin around me. Derek was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. He was facing serious prison time, years of his life that he would never get back. His wife, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, broke down in sobs. His children, my nephews, looked at their father with confusion and fear. Their world had just been shattered, and I felt a pang of guilt for that. They hadn't asked for any of this. They were innocent victims of their father's greed. But my guilt was fleeting. Derek had made his choices. He had chosen to harm our father, to steal from our family, to lie and manipulate. He had chosen to cut me out of our father's life, to make me feel worthless and unloved. He had chosen all of it, and now he was paying the price. I walked out of that courtroom feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had won. Justice had been served. But the victory felt hollow somehow, like I had gained something but lost everything else. My father was still sick. My family was still broken. And I was still alone. In the months after the trial, life settled into a new rhythm. Derek was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, a sentence that some people said was too lenient and others said was too harsh. He was stripped of his assets, his reputation, his freedom. Everything he had worked for, everything he had stolen, was gone. My father's estate was finally properly managed, and I became his legal guardian. I moved him into a care facility that actually cared for him, a place where he received the proper medication and attention. I visited him every week, even though he didn't always recognize me. I would sit beside him and talk about my mother, about the good times we had shared before everything fell apart. He would sometimes smile, sometimes squeeze my hand, and in those moments, I felt like I had a father again. The hardest part was dealing with the rest of my family. Some of them had taken Derek's side during the trial, believing his lies over the truth. They had called me a traitor, accused me of tearing the family apart. After the verdict, some of them reached out to apologize. They told me they had been fooled, that they hadn't understood the full extent of what Derek had done. But others, like my Aunt Patricia, refused to accept the truth. She continued to insist that I had fabricated everything, that I had destroyed her son's life out of petty jealousy. I stopped trying to convince her. Some people will never believe the truth, no matter how much evidence you present them. It was easier to let them go, to move on with my life without them in it. My father passed away about a year after the trial. He died peacefully in his sleep, and when the care facility called to tell me, I didn't feel the crushing grief I had expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. He was no longer suffering. He was no longer trapped in a body and mind that had failed him. He was finally at peace. I attended his funeral alone, standing at the back of the room while the few remaining family members gathered to pay their respects. I watched them cry and mourn for the man they had once known, and I felt like an outsider. They had taken sides during the trial, and even though some of them had apologized, the relationship had been permanently damaged. We were no longer a family. We were just strangers who shared a last name. As I write this now, looking back on everything that happened, I realize that I don't regret any of it. I don't regret fighting for justice. I don't regret exposing Derek's crimes. I don't regret taking control of my father's estate and ensuring he received proper care. What I regret is that it had to come to this. I regret that my brother chose money and power over family. I regret that my father's final years were stolen from him. I regret that my family is now broken beyond repair. But regret is a luxury I can't afford. I did what I had to do, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. My father deserved better. My mother deserved better. And I deserve better. I still live in Austin, still work as an architect, still pour my heart into designs that I hope will make the world a little bit better. I've started a foundation in my mother's name, one that provides financial assistance to families dealing with dementia and elder abuse. It's my way of turning something terrible into something meaningful, of ensuring that my mother's legacy lives on in a way that helps other people. I've also reconnected with some of my extended family members, the ones who weren't afraid to stand by me when things got difficult. We're building something new together, a family that chooses love over greed, that values honesty over appearances. It's not the family I grew up with, but it's a family I'm proud to be a part of. The courthouse steps, the cold concrete beneath my feet, the envelope in my jacket pocket, the desperate pleas from my family. It all feels like a lifetime ago now. The scars remain, of course. They always do. But they're a reminder of what I survived, of what I overcame. I'm no longer the quiet, overlooked younger brother who let his family walk all over him. I'm someone who stood up for what was right, who fought for justice even when it was difficult and painful. I'm someone who finally found his voice. And if there's one lesson I could share with anyone who's ever been betrayed by the people they love most, it's that you have to fight for yourself because no one else will. Family should be a source of unconditional love and support, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes family is just the place where you learn how to survive. And sometimes surviving means walking away. It means building your own life, your own family, your own definition of what matters. It means forgiving yourself for not being able to fix something that was never your fault. I've come to terms with everything that happened. I've forgiven my father for never being the man I needed him to be. I've forgiven Derek for his greed and his cruelty. I've even forgiven myself for the anger and resentment I carried for so long. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of hatred. And I needed to be free. I needed to move forward. And now, I finally have. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Family Dark Blames, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.